Hello there, I'm David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and today I'm going to talk you through where I've been, what I've been doing, and why, and to give you a bit of pretext to the journey we're about to go on, or the chronicling of the journey we're about to go on. I managed to reduce lots of medications simultaneously, basically, with an act of kind of semi-madness and semi-bravery. I was finding that my antipsychotics were becoming too strong. Basically, I was finding that I was borderline becoming depressed because of the effects of them. And I'd done some research in the past that suggested that in clinical trials with this particular antipsychotic that I'm on, which I'm not going to tell you what it is necessarily, that the maximum effective dose was 15 milligrams, and that I was taking 30, basically, plus 5 milligrams of an additional antipsychotic, plus 2 milligram tablets of diazepam near daily, up until relatively recently. Now, this hasn't happened because of a decrease in symptoms, or because I feel any more well. I've reached a kind of stabilization period where it's I felt that the side effects were becoming quite palpable, and if you're a schizophrenic or someone, a family of a person with schizophrenia, you may recognise these side effects in terms of just apathy, depression, stress, anxiety, low affect, which is where you don't really get any dopaminergic response to anything. It's been an interesting journey. It's been an interesting process. It's taken me about 2 months of just consistently experimenting, slowly lowering and then going back up a little bit, and then lowering again, slowly lowering and going back up again. So I've reduced by a quarter, plus removed an additional antipsychotic, which I was only taking 5 milligrams of, but near daily, and anti-anxiety tablets in the form of diazepam, which are 2 milligram ones, which I will tell you what that is, because that's quite common knowledge. And yeah, it's had some unexpectedly wonderful side effects, the reduction of them. There's also been some bits that have been quite unnerving, like, which I'll go into more, but things like being more emotional, like actually feeling my emotions again, has been quite unusual, outside of the fact that I've had a mild recurrence of my symptoms that have now plateaued. They've really nicely plateaued. Like, I think I may even go further later on and go down to that maximum effective dose of half what I was on before, which would be 15 milligram. But we'll explore that further in the video, and yeah, this is how it all went. So, the question you might be asking yourself is, why would someone who is stable, functional, vaguely able to hold his shit together and have a functional life want to reduce the medications that he so heavily relied on for all these years? And that last statement kind of sums it up. Is like, heavily relied on. A couple of consequences of being on such a high dose of medication that I've found really quite unbearable in recent years is that I don't feel my emotions as strongly as I could. Now, what first prompted it basically was I I have a child, and when he was very young, I would get very little sleep, as new parents often do. And I found that the peak period of my well-being was actually the first night, or the first day of being awake, the sort of 6 to 8 hours after the meds were starting to wear off would be like basically overnight, because the ones I take are a sort of daytime medication that work and function quite as a stimulant as well as an antipsychotic. And I found that a funny thing happened, because I'm a musician as well, you see, I play a lot of music, and what I found was happening was that I was getting these new memories. So it was like I had this kind of wall of voices and negative experiences that I would have to get through. And then I'm a bass player, you see. And I would find that because the traumatic things that happened that led up to me developing psychosis happened just around the time and just before all the just before all these things happened to me that caused my psychosis, effectively, my acute psychosis. I'd been training extensively for up to 8 hours a day as a musician. So if I could get through this kind of quite unpleasant fuzz of noise and static and drama and hallucination, that I would actually have kind of a new capacity in my brain, which is not as grandiose as it sounds. But basically, behind this wall of negative experience was a absolute load of memories, and I think that's what the voices I was hearing was stopping me from experiencing, and the meds were so prevalently kind of encouraging me to stay away from, because obviously in there's a load of trauma, there's a load of like negative things. But I've had so much counselling and I've done so much personal work, which I will detail later, as of late and in historically speaking, that I actually kind of took it upon myself, because the long story short is that of why I did it was I realised I was my most happy, most functionally in terms of memory, around the last quarter to the first quarter of the meds wearing off, and the first quarter of the night before the meds had completely worn off. Because by the morning I was anxious, and the experience had become too overwhelming. So that kind of sowed the seed there of like, are my meds perhaps too strong, basically. And there's also, I was finding that outside of this, new memories dawning and all my music theory being able to come back to me, I was finding that the effects of my meds when I took them, even when I'd slept and just in a normal day-to-day course, were becoming painfully depressing. It was like, it's like how people describe to me like amphetamine come down. Do you know what I mean? It's just like flat down, crushed feeling with all the weight of the world on you, and this would go on for 4 hours of every day, and I thought to myself, like, I'm suffering that every day without fail, regardless of what I do and how good my life's going. I'm just getting this bleak kind of bitter feeling. And then I remembered this thing about the medication, the dose I'm on being double the maximum effective dose. So that kind of prompted it. That was the gist of it. And I found, as I think I've mentioned in my Story of Schizophrenia video, I've done quite a lot of psychedelics historically, not at all in recent years, but that kind of sense of curiosity and bravery of like, can I endure this for long enough that I can actually reduce the medication and plateau? And that is actually in fact what happened. It's basically it was a force of will between me and the withdrawal, and fingers crossed, touch wood, so far it's going okay. It could go wrong in the future, I might need to put them back up, I don't know. But that's why I did it. The other side of it, which is really important to me to express, is that I was having trouble with a local pharmacy getting my meds, and they were causing a load of drama about it every time I wanted it. And then we've had this pandemic situation going on that has meant that like basically the fear in me was like, what if my meds suddenly stop? What if I just can't get them? Like, and I live in England. I'm not going to talk about the political situation here, but there is this concept that came up throughout the political discourse about the idea that medication supplies might run dry or might be difficult to acquire, and I didn't invest much stock in that, but the idea about that really actually drew to my attention. Was like, it's something I sort of negatively fantasized about all this time. It's like, how would I survive if suddenly I had no medication? And it was like, how quickly would I be able to plateau down and withdraw without going insane, and like, what could I do, and all these things. So that's kind of the why of it, and it's basically just this sense of urgency of like, I smoke cigarettes, for example. This is a really good way of putting it. It's like, I smoke cigarettes, and the consequence of smoking cigarettes is that as soon as you're addicted to them, you have to smoke, otherwise insert applicable catastrophic chain of events in your life. And I actually ascribe my medication similarly. It's like, it helps me, it's wonderful, I wouldn't change it. I do not recommend that you reduce your medication unless you're in advised by your doctors to do so, or you're in a similar situation to me, but I'm not giving any recommendations here that anyone reduces their medication. I'm just simply saying that, like, it's something that bothered me a lot, and I don't think I needed any more the dose I was on. Like, my symptoms, because I'm 33, I'm approaching a less risk zone. I've been on them for 15 years. I'm in kind of the ideal situation of stability. Like, I'm not going to get any better than I am now. It's only going to get worse or plateau, because it's a degenerative illness. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. So like I didn't want to be ultimately dependent on like this heavy dose that I was finding quite brutal and unpleasant. As I've gotten more and more stable, I didn't feel it was necessary or helpful really to sustain it. And then the last final thing of the why that occurred to me was like, if suddenly I do experience a psychotic relapse and I suddenly become really ill, say there's a bereavement or a loss or a trauma in my life that means that I have to kind of up my meds, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go except just adding more and more brutal and more additional like intense medications to cap those symptoms into that small bandwidth. That, like, I thought it might be worth, while I'm vaguely stable, kind of getting that a bit under control and giving myself a bit more room, because like something bad happens, I'm going to need those meds again. And if I'm already at 30, that means going up to 45 or 40 or 35 or 50 or 60 even, which can be prescribed, but it's not actually recommended because of the additional side effects. So that was quite verbose, but that's the gist of the why. So the positive and negative side effects of the withdrawal process. So this is going to be hard to talk about. I'm going to have to be quite brief because I was quite verbose in the last section. But one of the first things that I really, really noticed was that my emotions became way more obvious to me. Because one of the ways that antipsychotics work is they act on, specifically the one I'm on, 5-HT2A, 5-HT2-5, 5-HT2-7 serotonin receptors. D2, D3, and D5 and D7, I think, as well. They're dopamine receptors. I'm not sure about D7, but I think it's at least those receptors. And one might say that it's kind of has a regulating effect on the same receptors as LSD antagonizers. I can't remember if I've got this all around, but it's either an agonist or antagonist. And the agonist is LSD, so it acts on those sites, and the antipsychotics act as an antagonist, which actually down-regulates into a smaller bandwidth. So if your dopamine and serotonin levels are too low, it brings it up as well into this lovely little waveform of stability, and that's one of the things that makes it so successful and wonderful. So all that's really happened by that quarter reduction is that I've gone from kind of this bandwidth to like this bandwidth. Now that might not seem like much when I'm representing it like that, but like going down by a quarter was, oh yeah, it was fascinating, because it was like, oh, I can cry a little bit, like, and I'm still not. I've chronically not been able to cry for years. Like, I just don't feel enough. I don't feel enough to cry, and when I do cry, it's like, oh, like devastating tears. So that was a really novel thing, like just feeling love more strongly, just appreciation for things like, I've got this beautiful garden which I may feature scenes of in future videos. That is just like just looking at the leaves and being like, ah, that's so beautiful. I'd never, like really, really like confronted by this emotional, overwhelming kind of state where like, so that's one kind of partially positive, partially negative. Is like obviously there's the corresponding downside of that. It's like, well, if I'm angry, I'm like, whoa, whoa, and it's someone just doing something arbitrary, like, and that took a bit of getting used to, especially because I reduced down the sedative antipsychotics and that as well. But I'm not going to tell you the method of exactly how I did it. I might feature that later in the video, but in fact, yeah, I might actually talk about that later on. But the rough gist was that like my emotional bandwidth kind of expanded only a bit, like, because it used to be like off the charts. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd be like nirvanic heavenly bliss or like absolute devastating misery. But and that was just, I had those extremes of emotion. There was very little kind of calm polarity, and all it's done is just expanded that bit more. That like it feels like I'm more human, which is really good. I immediately experienced a decrease in the nausea that I got in the morning when I first take the medication, first take my meds, which is like that in itself has made the whole any annoyance or stress of it completely worth it, because just taking one half of a pill less, because I take two a day at the same time as well, it's just like just the effect on my stomach was just wonderful, and like started to appreciate food more, and like don't let me oversell it, like the negatives are about to come in this story as well, but it was like that increase in bandwidth, like it was almost like there was a texture that I'd been missing out on of life. And I'm sure because when I initially did it, I was like, oh, let's go down to half and just see what happens. I did it for like 2-3 days of just half my meds, and that was like a roller coaster. That was like, boom, whoa, loads of emotions. Like it was quite cool at first, but if something upset me, like I would be like, oh my god, it's so tough. So it's just I wouldn't jump down to half of any antipsychotic ever really. But what that did do for me is give me the ability to go, all right, that's the extreme version of it. So let's just do a milder version of that. So I first chipped down like a quarter of a tablet less, and then half a tablet less. That took me about 2.5 weeks. And in that time, so what have I put here? Yeah, so the positive side of it was like more emotional openness, more ability to feel, but with that comes the consequence of more ability to feel. So that's the other side of it. It's like my anxiety was particularly high, but I kind of went into it with this kind of aeronautical, psychonautical enthusiasm for the experience of like, you know, if I can ride this out, like this is going to be really good. And that first 3 or 4 days of, I think it was about 3.5 days in total of reducing down to just flat half, really made an impression on me, because it was like it was quite a psychedelic experience. Like do not do this. I mean you watching, specifically you, whoever you are that thinks you can just jump in and reduce it. Like I'm quite an unusual case in that I have like such a good support network as well. Do you know what I mean? And like I did it out of necessity, and because I knew that if I wrote it out, it would be good. Do not try this. There'll probably be a disclaimer at the start of the video saying specifically that is, don't try it unless at all. Basically, at least not on my advice. Like I'm not a doctor. I am, for all intents and purposes for this discussion, an insane person that you should not take the advice of. I'm just reporting what happened. So with that like self-deprecating statement out of the way, that first 3 days of like more extremely reducing it was lovely, but harrowing. And then I was like, okay, so I've exposed myself to that level of it with extreme emotions, more anxiety, more like my hallucinations in that first 3 days just rose and rose and rose and rose and rose and rose and rose to the point where it was like, okay, no, that was too much. But it did sow the seeds of like, okay, well, I endured that quite nicely. And I saw what the chaos point was. I saw how, like, it was about day 2.5 of just that drop down that I was like, okay, about here I can endure comfortably without it having this horrible negative effects on anyone else. And then after that I was like, I let it go on for a couple of days longer, specifically to see, basically I wanted to find out what the withdrawal felt like, and I did find that out, and it wasn't nice, which is why I'm saying just don't effing try this on my recommendation, because it's not a good idea. Specifically you. Right. So the negative side effects were like the same as the positive side effects. It was like emotional instability, overwhelming emotions, more powerful hallucinations. And I'm the kind of curious person that was like, how far can I push this really? And I was like, no, 4 days. But at the start of the fourth day, I was like, I think, because I stayed awake one of the days as well for 2 days in a row, and I was like, you know what, this is getting a bit much. And then I tapered down. I tapered back up, sorry. So the next day I took the full dose again. Or I think, yeah, was it? Yeah, so it was about pretty much the next day I was like, oof, full dose, not dealing with that. So yeah, so there was increased hallucinations, increased emotionalness in general, increased anxiety. If you bear in mind, I'd tapered my diazepam before this over a couple of weeks, like, and I'd just flat stopped the sedative antipsychotic because I was getting weight gain, a little bit of like dependency on it, and I could feel it coming in, and I was only having that because I was struggling anyway, a little bit, and so I've kind of gone like flat the other way, which created this like bubbling, rising, come up effect, and then I went straight back up, and the next time I went down by half of half, so 7.5 milligram, and that seemed to be way more manageable this time, because I went, instead of just half, it was like, a quarter down, but a quarter down, and that was the sweet spot for me. I was like, the first 6 days or so were like holding on for dear life, and like I got very emotional. My partner has just been just incredible support. Like, she's a hero. Even my son, just a legend. Like I said, explained to him, I'm doing this so that I can be more happy, and he was just really supportive. Like, you don't expect that from a young kid, like, just to have that level of insight and anyway, yeah, blah blah blah. My private life is not your concern, but yeah, the general gist is that fascinating things occurred, and one of those was me experimenting with this idea of animism, which was one of the things I used to experience during psychosis. And I remembered this from the halving process. As soon as I halved it, I was like, oh yeah, like thought broadcasting, and this applies to literally everything in the whole universe, like dialogue with like a tree, like, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's literally quite odd thinking, that is normally reserved for people on psychedelics or in deep psychosis, and either way that's like amazing or just terrifying. Like, and just remembering what it is I was blocking out with the meds and preparing myself for it, is I had a little week gap in between the half reduction and then the more long term reduction, and it meant that, so animism is basically like a spiritual tradition of like everything has consciousness. Like, I have consciousness, therefore this insect, this plant, this tree, the concrete even has consciousness. I don't have any dialogue with static objects because I don't think that's in the range of my potential perception, but the point is that it prepared me for the novel experiences that were to come, that became extremely fascinating. And I'm going to kind of stop there and detail a little bit more of how I managed it, and then what I was managing when I explained to you how I managed it. So the first thing, and I'm going to have to be brief now for the remainder of the video because I'm trying to keep this under half an hour, ideally around 20-25 minutes, so that'll be hopefully a good time frame. I think I'm on about 15 minutes at the moment, not sure, you'll have to look down and see. Primarily the mode of action that helped me survive this was like a kind of semi-morbid or bravery element of just curiosity. Was just like, I was quite fascinated to see like what was in there, because like I was pretty over medicated until I did this, and I still am on, like, the amount I'm on is quite a lot, and yeah, it was just like real curiosity. Is like, because basically it was almost like a watermarking or a benchmarking of like, how much have I progressed since I was originally psychotic, because I was like, I knew at the time, I had insight that I was insane, so that's why I sought help and sectioned myself and got all these support and, instigated this whole mental health process. But like, yeah, I was like, has the therapy, has the healing, has what I've been doing to keep myself sane been working? Like, and yeah, it was really interesting. And so, managing it, I immediately sought to get, once I'd done my first experiment, I was like, right, I need to talk to a psychiatrist, I need to get permission, basically, because if something goes wrong, they're going to be my first port of call, so I needed to check in with them, which, if you do consider this, again, highly recommending that you don't, but if you do consider this, you want to be checking in with your psychiatrist and your mental health support team so that they're monitoring you, so that you can call them at all hours of the night if you need to. I didn't have to, fortunately, which was really, really good. So I immediately notified them, got the the go ahead, as I explained basically everything I've explained in this previous section of the video. So yeah, I made sure I had support. It sounds self-indulgent, but it was a tremendous act of bravery. It was like, am I going, like I said in the story of Schizophreniform's video, it was a bit like a milder form of like the psychedelic thing of like, it's either this or hell forever. I was just like, it's either this or never really feeling satisfied, never really feeling happy, never really feeling alive, to be honest. And like I said, it's a preventative action in some ways, and like that spurred me on. It was like, you know, I can always take more antipsychotics, you know, I can always close that bandwidth down even further. But what I won't always be able to do is open it up again, you know, because this is a degenerative illness. It leads to dementia, it leads to long-term brain damage if it's untreated, it leads to untold levels of like irreversibility. So there's a limited time frame in which I'm going to be able to like reduce my medication, and that gave me courage. Like that thought of like, you know, what happened last time when I first became psychotic. I was psychotic for 2 years before I got treatment, like by my own estimation, and had symptoms of schizophrenia since I was like a teenager. So like pretty far down that line, and I'm like, I'm nothing like that person now. Do you know what I mean? Like who I am now, like I still can't even really go outside. Like as you'll see if you go back and watch telepathy versus thought broadcasting or something like that, well, I can't remember what the title is, one of my previous videos, that's what I'm like when I'm outside, like especially trying to describe thought broadcasting. Like I'm a pretty anxious person, and that hasn't really diminished at all. Like my general inability to cope hasn't changed much, but my level of misery, whoa, that is rapidly diminishing with each day. And I'm not trying to sell this to you, don't do it, but if you're in my position and you've got mental health support, you've got your consent from your psychiatrist, you're as level-headed and articulate as me despite your symptoms, maybe it would be beneficial to you. I don't know, I can't make that assertion about your personal life, but what I will say is that I managed it with the techniques that I've learned over the past 15 years. Lots of meditation. When it became too emotional, I'd go and ground myself with a mindfulness meditation, which is a technique I've explored extensively over the past 15 years, and it's one of the primary reasons I'm saying outside medication and mental health support. So mindfulness meditation, like even if it's the first time you do it, I recommend to anyone, even the most neurotypical person in the world, mindfulness meditation will help you cope with life beautifully, and it has some of the novel experiences that might be able to help you navigate the more psychotic elements of schizophrenia as well, which could be quite fascinating if you do it in a controlled and healthy way. So mindfulness is a big part of it. What else have I written here? Yes, so that was another thing that I did that was very interesting, was that as I felt the recurrence of these, because I knew I was going into this situation voluntarily, basically, it was very much like doing a psychedelic. Like you build up, you're like, oh fuck, I don't know what's going to go on, but fuck it, I'm going to do it. And then you reduced the medication, knowing that my memories were going to come back, the memories that were suppressed by the medication, fully aware that I might experience a psychotic relapse. And that gave me this curiosity and willingness to actually, because I knew the memories would come back. I knew like the most traumatic things that happened to me would come back. So I just brought love at it. I just came at it with like, this will improve my life. It's worth it. I will suffer to go through this process, and I willingly suffered. And that attitude of like, I think this is something Dr. Jordan Peterson says, referencing Nietzsche. This is where the concept that was actually really useful in this process. And he said that Nietzsche said that anyone who has an appropriate why can endure anyhow. And that really stuck with me, and it's been my kind of mantra almost when it's gotten a bit too much, and too much emotion, too stressful, too powerful. And I will say, you can probably tell in the difference between this video and the previous videos how much more animated I am, how much more like enthusiastic I am. And I've been putting off making this video for ages because I wanted to get stable. But this energy level is just wonderful. I haven't been able to talk this fluidly for years without some without being drunk or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just have this alleviation of misery, and it's wonderful. So I will give it that benefit. But the reason I've been able to endure it is because I'm like fully aware that I'm going to be re-traumatized slightly. And I just go into these memories, and they would come up like flashbacks, like really vivid, painful flashbacks. And I'd be like, no, this is why I'm here. This is what I need to endure to get down to this lower meds. And I will carry this through probably when I go on to the next reduction in meds, which is, I've discussed it, it's going to be about 6 months, probably, maybe to a year. It's at my discretion, but minimum 6 months. And like, voluntarily re-embracing experiences that have been suppressed for 15 years. That's why I say it's an act of bravery. It's not me being vain. It's like, I've been chemically short viewed for years, and then going back to just even that little bit more bandwidth, like, it was difficult at first. Like, some really nasty shit has happened to me a lot, like in my past, and you may discover more of this depending on how inclined I feel in future videos, or if you go back and watch the brief kind of the story of schizophreniform. It's about 20 minutes. It's interesting, tells you about me and my life and my experiences. It might be worth watching, especially in context of this video. And I would say, like, revisiting those traumatic memories with just like fucking courage. Sorry, I keep swearing, but revisiting those memories, like going, this is what I'm blocking out that is preventing me from progressing in my condition, with this sense of bravery, with the mindfulness skills, with the confidence, with the very real feeling that like this will get me somewhere good, like going through hell again, re-entering hell. And you know that word hell is not said lightly by me. It's like voluntarily dipping your toe into hell so that you can go, okay, if I can learn to endure this experience again, maybe I don't have to feel the misery, the flat affect, the grimness, the stomachache, the nausea, the just bawling that is antipsychotics. Do you know what I mean? And that was a big part of how I managed to manage the experience, which is just courage at the end of the day. A real just determination that like because these memories that came up weren't nice, and I was like, nah. And what I did, so I did this thing, I called it like time travel meditation. What you do is you kind of, and I'll make a whole video about this, I promise I will make a whole video about it, but you, if I remember, no, I'll watch this back and remember, you basically voluntarily start at the most recent memory you have, like what happened yesterday, and I'll do a whole video on this. What happened the day before yesterday, and then you track back to those more and more terrifying moments from your past, and you go like, okay, I'll have a quick look. Like, okay, that thing happened. Yeah, I know that happened. I can skirt around it. Next memory. And each time you do that tracking process, you find you can more, especially with traumatic memories, they're very vivid. And so the more you can reintroduce that, which is something I've been working on for 15 years now, but the more you can reintroduce those traumatic memories, the more vivid they initially become, and then the more black and white and boring they become. You know, oh yeah, that thing that happened, yeah, and you go through it, and like your brain's like, yeah, this happened, yeah, blah 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 blah. Hated that experience, but now I've reintegrated the memory of it, and in my case, I've found that means that good memories have come back. Things I didn't know I knew, things that have been blocked out since I got brain damage from various things that happened in my life. And it was like, oh, okay, I remember like riding my bike when I was a kid or something. It's like, it's just in between these little traumatic memories. It's like, oh, this wonderful thing that happened, and like I wouldn't have ever remembered that had I not had the balls to kind of, sorry, I don't like using that word to describe it, but the confidence to re-embrace the things in punctuating my life, because traumatic memories stand out more, they're more vivid, and they last longer, and they're more inherently repressed. So that's it. It's just like really having the courage. Like, and this is something I'm going to have to do probably for several years now. But look out for the time travel video, because it's an interesting meditative experience. And I've, with people outside of, you know, basically people I know have been approaching using this memory regainment effect. And it's one of the novel experiences about it is that if it's a traumatic memory, there's a lot of like latent energy kind of built up, and I don't mean that metaphysically. I mean like there's a lot of focus that's detracted from your experience, having to block that out. And the wonderful thing about it, as you can see, I'm so animated, energetic, can talk my arse off. One of the things that's happened that's led to that is that I've been able to withdraw from these traumatic memories all this energy that I've been using to block them out, which means, and this is why it can be dangerous, because you can go into the mania level or the dopamine spiral out of this. So you have to, and that's the next section, what to look out for. My point is that I regained what feels like to me part of my soul back from these traumatic memories. Like a chunk of me has just flooded back into me, and I feel alive again, and that is why I'll make another video about it. So I'm going to have a deep breath and be back with section probably 4, which is what would I advise if you do it. So I'll be back. Section 4. So as you can see, I've calmed down a little bit now. This is my advice for what would I recommend other people to do if they're in a similar situation. So yeah, I mean, like, you know yourself, you know your relationship with your doctor, you know your own circumstances. If you're not stable enough to attempt this, do not attempt it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't actually recommend this unless you're in the position I'm in, which is relatively stable for 4 or 5 years, still completely symptomatic but stable, and taking more medication of your particular medication than is actually medically effective. That's my circumstance. Yeah, bear in mind that it'll be difficult, basically, and talk to your doctor. Don't do this by yourself. Like, I did a little experiment, 3-4 days, and that's because I've done experiments in the past. I tend to do it every 6 months to a year. What I've done for the past few years is I've gone full meds, half meds, full meds, half meds, full meds, half meds for a few days, because the side effects of my meds have got a bit much. And when I'm feeling really comfortable and stable and confident and a bit like overconfident, I've tried that, and it's always had a wonderful effect. But then the consequence of that is that as I'm rebuilding, it takes time to rebuild the level of antipsychotics in your system. So don't do it unless you're in good confidence with your doctor that they think you can do it. So that's one thing I would advise. The other thing is that cultivating this attitude of bravery, cultivating this like real honesty, real sincere honesty, is like, am I able to handle this? Do I see this as having negative consequences on other people? Are other people bearing the brunt of my decision, and is that fair? Are they willing to do that? Have you got their consent? Like everyone I know, all my friends and family and everyone, knew I was doing this and why, and supported me, and I had my doctors and my mental health team, and they all saw where I was going with it and why, and supported me. So you need to have that solid base before you even consider doing this. I have also been stable for, basically not insane, for a good 5, maybe 7 years. Like, and the early stage of that 7 years, I was still way out of touch with reality, you know. So it took time to get to this state, and a lot of that came from meditation. So learning to meditate healthily is a tool I would recommend to anyone. The third factor, which I will discuss more on this channel extensively and have previously discussed, is basically dealing with trauma. Basically being able to actually endure the memories of the thing, because like, I don't know if this is the case for every schizophrenic, but I know it's quite common. It's like statistically very common that you've been traumatized, or they have been traumatized. If you're watching this as someone who knows someone with it, there's traumatic elements, and it might not be that something physical has happened. It may be that mental events traumatize them. It may be that global events traumatize them, but there's always an element of like real harrowing experiences have happened to this person or to you if you're watching this as a schizophrenic, and you need to process that stuff before you even consider this. You need to heavily process that stuff. You need therapy. You need to, and I don't look at me here as though like I've done this by myself. I haven't. I've had endless therapy, endless counselling since I was like 14, like to get to this point, and I'm still mentally ill. Do you know what I mean? As far as mentally ill, whatever you want to put it, like this has taken years of work. I'm just reporting what happened, but if you think you can do it, like I'm not recommending it, but if you think you can do it, make sure you've got solid people around you. That's the emphasis. And ultimately, you know, if you're stable, like basically if you're not getting worse in your condition and that goes on for several years and you feel like you can cope and you've integrated a lot of stuff, like, and you can process those memories when they come up, like, maybe this could be for you. I don't know, I'm not recommending it, but you know, if you've been stable for 5 years, man, and like not getting any worse, not getting any more symptoms, and you're finding your meds are too much, like maybe this, you know, I'm not a doctor, your doctor's a doctor, talk to them, but maybe if it's been 5 years, which is like generally as far as I'm aware the psychiatrically recommended minimum duration of stability before you even consider withdrawing medication, it might even be 3 years. That I think 5 is a good benchmark personally. Maybe this could be for you. And the other thing to bear in mind, look how energized I am. Look how like I'm a pretty enthusiastic speaker, and like when I'm solo, like I am now, like I am quite an impassioned speaker. But you can see the positive net effect. You need to be able to manage that. Like you need to be able to regulate yourself, because especially in the case of meds I'm on, it's a regulator, and if you go too high, too low, that's your problem. Like, and you can't inflict that on other people unless A, they've consented to it, and B, it's going to have a net positive effect. Like if it's going to ultimately lead to you being better as a person, like it needs to pay off for them as much as it is for you. So that's sort of section 4, what I would advise. And then we sort of touched on what will be section 5, so I'll keep rolling because this video needs to wrap up pretty soon. I've gone on a bit long. What to look out for? You want to look out for, as I just mentioned, the dizzying highs, because you'll notice the lows. You'll notice the increase in negative symptoms. You'll notice whatever the memories are for you, or whatever the experiences, whatever the delusion that starts to rise, you know, is. You'll notice all that, but what you may not notice is how good you feel spiraling out of control. And that is something I cannot emphasize enough. Is like the net effect of withdrawing from something that regulates or controls or down-regulates dopamine is more dopamine. Like you will feel great. Like it feels good to reduce medication, and that's something to be mindful of. That's something to be really mindful of, because you might end up addicted to the higher dopamine level and then crash, and then you'll just be like, oh, boom, negativity coming right back to you in the untold ways that you can't possibly imagine. So that's kind of the main thing I would look out for, is like the hyper state. Like I mean, like, you know, I'm impassionedly talking about this. I'm trying to convey a point. Like I can be calm, like I can be rational, but I haven't summarized this yet to any one particular focal point. So but you can see in the animatedness of my character, like it's had a real knock-on effect on like my ability to feel good, and you have to be really aware of that and down-regulate it. Like I'm going to go meditate after this. Like I'm gonna take the time to cool off and to down-regulate myself through meditation, and through like maybe have a beer or something, you know what I mean, just to take off the edge of the power of talking about these experiences, because in itself it is a powerful experience. Like reducing antipsychotics produces psychosis, and psychosis, when you've dealt with all your trauma, when you've dealt with everything that kind of, like, you may even know this if you're watching this as a psychotic person or someone that's previously been psychotic, you may know that like it's a very alluring state to be psychotic. Like it's not just bad feelings, it's like it can be horrifying, yeah, but it can also be wonderful, to the point where you become delusional. You get the people with bipolar type 2, I think they call it, I don't know, the bipolar with elements of psychosis. You can go really far up that mania spiral, and you just need to learn, like I'm doing now, just to calm, ground yourself, look around the room, count the objects, deep breathing, both feet on the floor, you know, just really learn to manage your experience. So I think that's pretty much the end of the video because I'm really pushed for time. Unless I think of anything else to tack on. Thank you for sticking with me and watching this. This has been an interesting month or two of this experiment. Can I recommend it? Not in good conscience. Has it been wonderful for me? Yes. That's basically the summary of the video. I've been David Bradley, aka Schizophrenic Forms. Peace.